You have 3 days to get out. This is my father's house, not yours." That was the first thing Clarissa said to me after her father died. Not "I'm sorry for your loss," not "how are you holding up." Just that sentence, sharp and final, delivered in the entryway of the house I had lived in, loved in, and cared for as a wife. My name is Rosa Johnson. I am 64 years old, and 3 hours after I buried my husband, his daughters tried to erase me. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, not because it is dramatic, but because it is true. And because women like me, women who have loved quietly, given fully, and aged honestly, are too often expected to leave without a sound. Edward was my husband. Clarissa and Jade were his daughters from his first marriage. They were grown when I met him, already living their own lives, already convinced that whatever belonged to their father would one day belong to them. I was never part of that future in their minds. Edward and I met late in life. We were both widowed. We both knew what it meant to wake up to an empty side of the bed and still make coffee for 2 out of habit. We weren't looking for passion or rescue. We were looking for peace. The morning of his funeral, I stood at the graveside holding a white rose. Clarissa and Jade stood several feet away, dressed in black coats that still smelled new. When the service ended, they left without saying goodbye. I went home alone. I was still in my black dress when the front door opened without a knock. Clarissa walked in first, heels clicking, posture straight, eyes already scanning the room like she was taking inventory. Jade followed more slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. Clarissa didn't sit down. She didn't take off her coat. She looked at me like I was furniture that had overstayed its usefulness. "You have 3 days to get out. This is my father's house, not yours." For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. Grief can distort sound. Trauma can rearrange words. "I'm sorry?" I asked. She repeated it, slower this time, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You and my dad were married for 4 years. That doesn't make you family. This house was his long before you came along." Jade shifted uncomfortably. "Clarissa, maybe we should—" "No," Clarissa cut her off. "This needs to be handled now." "That where?" "Handled. Like paperwork. Like clutter." She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the console table where Edward used to drop his keys. The sight of that folder sitting there, on his table, made my stomach turn. "Our lawyer prepared a settlement," Clarissa said. "We're offering you $200,000. You sign, you move out, and this ends cleanly." I did not touch the folder. $200,000. "Clarissa, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice small. "You heard me," she said, already pulling papers from her bag. I stepped forward instinctively, not to argue, but to plead. I reached out and wrapped my fingers gently around her wrist. "Clarissa, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling, "you can't mean that. I know this is hard. We're all grieving, but I'm still—" "Don't!" she snapped, jerking her arm away from me. But I didn't let go. I held on, tighter now, desperate for some recognition. "Please, listen to me. I've been here for years. I've cooked for you, prayed for you. I've tried to love you like my own. You're—" She yanked her arm free, and with one sharp motion, shoved me backward. I stumbled, lost my balance, and fell hard onto the hallway floor. My elbow hit the wood. My breath caught in my chest. Jade gasped, took a step forward, but Clarissa didn't move. She stood over me, eyes blazing with something deeper than grief. Contempt. "All of that?" she hissed. "The dinners, the birthday cards, the little care packages. That was all for him, Rosa. We did it for him, because it made him happy to think we accepted you, but we never did. You were never family." Her words hit harder than the fall. "I watched you play house. Call us sweetheart like you were someone," she continued. "You think a few Sunday roasts and some fake smiles earn you a place in this family? You're not my mother. You never were. You were a placeholder, a distraction, while he tried to pretend he wasn't lonely." I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came. I lay there, tears welling in my eyes, heart thudding against the cold wood beneath me. I had loved them. Truly. I had wrapped birthday gifts with care, made soup when Jade had the flu, stayed up late waiting for Clarissa when her flight got delayed. I had thought, foolishly, that love given with honesty would eventually be returned. But I was wrong. Clarissa straightened her coat, as if nothing had happened. "I'm not going to argue," she said. "You have 3 days. Jade and I will be back with the realtor on Monday." They turned and walked out, heels tapping like a clock counting down. When the door slammed shut, I stayed on the floor, unable to move. The chandelier above swayed slightly from the force of the door, casting fractured light across the hallway. My body ached, but what hurt more was the truth she'd spoken. They had never seen me as family. Later that evening, I made myself tea but couldn't drink it. I sat at the kitchen table. Edward's chair pulled out just slightly. He always left it that way. I stared at it, remembering the way he used to rest his hand on my shoulder when he passed behind me. "Mama?" Leah's voice came through the phone, full of worry. "How was the service?" I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How do you tell your daughter that you were cast aside like a stranger in your own home? "They want me out," I said finally. Leah's voice sharpened. "Who does?" "Clarissa and Jade," they said. They said I was never family. I heard her inhale sharply. "You can't let them do this. You were his wife." They offered money. A settlement. They even had a lawyer draw it up. "No, Mama, listen to me. You don't sign a single thing. You hear me? We'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this. It's been in to start." "I'm tired," I whispered. "I just buried my husband. I'll come. Tomorrow. We'll figure this out." I thanked her and hung up, but I didn't move. I sat in that kitchen until the sky outside turned dark blue, the kind of blue that only comes after loss. The phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something inside me, a flicker of defiance, maybe made me pick it up. "Mrs. Johnson?" A calm woman's voice said. "This is Adele Barnes. I was Edward's attorney." End quote. My heart stilled. "I heard about what happened today, and I think you should come see me tomorrow morning." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because Edward made arrangements, and I think it's time you knew exactly what they were." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. She continued, soft but steady. "He knew them, Rosa. He knew this might happen." When I hung up, I looked at the walls around me, at the picture frames, the side table where Edward always dropped his keys. I felt bruised in every way a woman can feel bruised: body, heart, dignity. But something had shifted. For the first time since the funeral, I no longer felt like I was waiting to be erased. I felt like I had just been handed a thread. And maybe, just maybe, it would lead me back to justice. If this story touched you, hit like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You never know who nearby might be watching with you. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling while the shadows from the willow tree outside danced along the walls. My elbow throbbed from the fall, but the pain was dull compared to the ache inside my chest. Clarissa's words echoed, looping through my mind like a cruel lullaby. "You were never family. You were a placeholder." At sunrise, I made coffee, though I didn't drink it. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of the mug, waiting for time to pass. My fingers were still trembling. I hadn't unpacked my overnight bag from the funeral yet. It was still sitting by the door, half-zipped. The dress I'd worn to bury Edward hung across the back of the chair, like a ghost of the day before. The call from Adele had felt like a life preserver thrown into rough waters. I clung to it all night. Edward had made arrangements. He knew. What that meant, I didn't know yet. But it was the only thing giving me the strength to pull on my coat and walk out the door. I took the bus downtown. I could have driven, but my hands were too shaky. The ride was long, and every time we stopped, I felt the urge to get off and go back home. No, not home anymore, apparently. Just a house with a deadline. Adele's office was on the 23rd floor of a glass building that looked like it belonged to someone with polished shoes and a voice that said billable hours without smiling. I felt small walking through the lobby, my coat too worn, my shoes scuffed. But when I stepped out of the elevator, Adele Barnes was already waiting. She was tall, with dark brown skin and gray streaks in her hair pulled into a low bun. Her suit was navy and sharp, but what struck me most were her eyes, kind but focused, like someone who had spent her life standing in rooms full of men who didn't want her there. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, offering her hand, "I'm very sorry for your loss." End quote. End quote. I shook her hand, gripping tighter than I meant to. "Please call me Rosa," I said. My voice cracked. She gestured me into her office, a corner room with wide windows and shelves full of law books. There was a photo on her desk, her with Edward, both smiling, years ago. "I've known Edward since we were in college," she said as we sat. "He trusted me with more than just his legal matters. He trusted me with his worries, especially the ones he never wanted to burden you with." End quote. I swallowed hard. "He told you they might come after me." She nodded slowly. He didn't want to believe it. But he knew his daughters. He hoped they would surprise him. But he planned for the opposite. Adele reached into her desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was handwritten across the front in Edward's neat, looping script. "He wrote this a week before he passed," she said, "and updated his will 2 days later." My fingers trembled as I took the letter. I stared at it for a moment before slipping it into my bag. I couldn't open it yet, not here, not now. If I read his words, I might fall apart, and I needed to stay together. "May I ask what the will says?" I asked. She opened a folder and slid it toward me. "Edward left the house to you, Rosa, along with all its contents. He also left you his retirement accounts, his investments, and full control of the family trust. The business assets will be handled separately, but those too were arranged to protect you." I blinked. "All of it?" "He loved you," she said simply. "And he knew that Clarissa and Jade wouldn't take kindly to that." I sat back, stunned. I had never asked Edward for money, never even seen the numbers. He'd once joked that I was the only person in his life who didn't treat him like an ATM, that I only ever wanted him, not what he could give me. Now I realized how deeply he had understood what was coming. "But what about them?" I asked. "His daughters." "He left them each a sum," Adele said, her voice even, $100,000 apiece, but with a condition. My eyebrows rose. "If either of them attempts to pressure you, threaten you, or challenge the will in any legal capacity within 120 days of his passing, they forfeit everything." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That explains why they moved so fast," I murmured. "They wanted me to sign something before I knew better." Adele nodded. "Precisely. They wanted you out of the picture before I could reach you, but Edward made sure you'd be protected." My eyes stung. I wiped them quickly. "I thought they cared," I whispered. "I really did. I treated them like they were mine. I cooked for them, bought them gifts, defended them to Edward when he was disappointed. I thought if I just kept giving, they'd see me." Adele leaned forward. "People like you, Rosa women who love without expectation, they are rare, and they are often the ones most taken for granted." I pressed my hand to my chest. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," she said, "which is why you deserve it." We sat in silence for a moment. "What now?" I finally asked. "I recommend we set up a formal meeting with their attorney," she said. "Let them hear the will from my mouth. Let them understand the consequences. And if they still push?" She gave a small smile. "Then we push back harder. Legally." I nodded slowly. Before I left, she handed me a second document, a copy of the will and her card. "Call me if they come back," she said. "Or if you feel unsafe." "Thank you," I said, my voice soft but firm, "for standing beside me." "I'm not standing beside you, Rosa," she said, holding my gaze. "I'm standing with you." "It's no." On the bus ride home, I held Edward's letter in my hands but didn't open it. Not yet. I wanted to read it in the house we had made together, in the chair where he used to sit, because now, for the first time in 24 hours, I remembered something Clarissa hadn't counted on. This was my home, and I wasn't leaving. The house was silent when I returned, still, heavy, and too clean. The kind of silence that clung to the corners and made every creak of the floorboards feel like a question. I stood just inside the doorway for a moment, holding Edward's letter in both hands, not yet ready to open it. The sun had shifted across the hardwood floors, casting soft, golden lines through the curtains. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the old willow tree in the front yard, the one Edward used to trim every spring, always muttering that it was getting too wild. I walked into the living room and sat in Edward's armchair, sinking into the worn cushion that still held his shape. The leather creaked softly beneath me, like a breath. I stared at the fireplace. The photos on the mantel, our wedding picture in a simple wooden frame, a snapshot of us at the farmer's market, him laughing, my hand resting on his shoulder. Real moments. not placeholders. Then I opened the letter. My Rosa, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened, and for that, I am so deeply sorry. I promised you time. I promised you a garden full of sunflowers next spring. I wish I had more days to keep those promises. But more than that, I wish I had more time to protect you. I know my daughters. I know what they believe, what they expect. I know they never accepted you, not fully, not truly, and I also know that you kept trying. God, how you tried. I saw it. I saw every quiet kindness you gave them. I saw every time you bit your tongue to keep the peace, and I saw how they looked right through you, as if love given without blood is less real. They are wrong. You, Rosa, were my home, not the house, not the accounts. You, that's why I changed the will. Not to punish them, but to protect you, because I know you wouldn't ask for anything, and I know you would give away everything if it meant keeping the peace. I don't want you to do that. Not this time. I'm not here to fight your battles, but I did everything I could to stack the odds in your favor. Let Adele guide you. Trust her. She has your back, like I wish I still could. And if things get too hard, if the weight feels too heavy, remember this. You were never a placeholder. You were the love of my final chapter, and I am so damn grateful you came into my life. All my love. Edward. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. The kind of sob that doesn't come from sadness alone, but from being seen, from having your truth spoken aloud, even after someone's gone. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the tears dried, and I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. I placed it in the drawer beside the chair, his chair. My chair, now. Later that evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted chicken with rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes, and a side of green beans. The same meal I used to cook for Edward when the weather turned. He used to say it smelled like Sunday evenings and old records. I set the table for one, but I placed a second plate across from me anyway. A quiet ritual, a form of memory. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Clarissa, we're coming by tomorrow afternoon with the realtor. You need to be packed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. They didn't know yet. They had no idea what Edward had done. No idea that their time was ticking, not mine. And I wasn't going to respond. Not yet. I cleaned up the kitchen slowly, humming an old Sam Cooke tune under my breath. I washed each dish, dried each one by hand, and placed them back in the cabinets like I always did. Because this house wasn't just a building, it was a life I had built with care, with hands that cooked and cleaned and comforted. They were coming tomorrow, but this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. Before bed, I called Leah. She answered on the first ring. Mama? I met with Adele, I said. Edward left me everything. There was silence, then a slow exhale. I'm not surprised, she said. He loved you. Anyone with eyes could see that. End quote. I think it's time they hear it for themselves, I whispered. Do you want me to come? She asked. Not yet. Let me handle tomorrow first. If it goes bad, I might need backup. You've got it, she said. You've got me, always. After we hung up, I walked through the house slowly, touching the back of chairs, the top of door frames, the edge of picture frames. I wasn't saying goodbye. I was remembering, reclaiming, reminding myself that I had every right to be here. In the hallway, I picked up the manila folder Clarissa had left behind. I hadn't opened it before, but tonight I did. It was all there. A legal agreement for me to waive my rights, accept the cash offer, and vacate the property within 10 days. Their lawyer had already signed. There was even a sticky note that read, "Please sign before Thursday." I smiled, not out of amusement but out of a clarity that tasted close to justice. Tomorrow, they would return, expecting a woman on her knees. What they would find was a widow standing tall, letter in her heart, lawyer at her side, and no intention of being erased. They arrived at 2:03 p.m. sharp. I'd been standing in the living room since 1:45, dressed in a navy cardigan. Edward had loved the one with the little pearl buttons and the soft collar he used to tease me about. "You always look like a Sunday school teacher in that sweater," he'd say, smiling. I wore it today like armor. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic tick of the wall clock and the slow hum of the refrigerator. Outside, The sun glinted through the large bay windows, catching the polished surface of the hardwood floor like spotlight on a stage. And then I heard it. The sound of expensive heels on concrete, laughter sharp, too loud. Then the key turning in the lock. They still hadn't returned it. Clarissa walked in first, dressed like she was headed to court. Gray fitted blazer, leather portfolio tucked under her arm, phone already in hand. Jade followed close behind, her posture tighter than before. And then a third woman, a stranger, mid-30s, all sleek hair and pointed shoes. She carried a large leather bag and was already looking around like she was pricing everything. The realtor. Clarissa didn't even look at me. "Well," she said, clapping her hands once, "we're going to want to paint before we list. Maybe open up the kitchen wall to modernize. Jade, make a note." "I'm still here," I said quietly. Clarissa turned, her expression unreadable. "Yes, you are, which is why we brought papers again. I figured after a couple days you'd come to your senses." The realtor raised an eyebrow at me, clearly unsure of what role I played in all this. Clarissa leaned in toward her and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Just the widow. Don't worry. I'm in have now today." I stepped forward. "Before you unpack anything," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "you should probably hear what I've got to say." Clarissa smirked. "Unless it's goodbye, I'm not interested." Jade gave me a glance, just a flicker, but enough to make me pause. Her eyes were tired, uncertain. But still, she said nothing. I walked over to the sideboard where I'd laid the folder Adele had given me, the copy of the will. I held it in my hands and met Clarissa's gaze squarely. "Edward updated his will 2 weeks before he passed," I said. "He left everything to me, the house, the accounts, the trust." Clarissa blinked. "Just once. That's not possible. It's legal. It's filed. It's valid." The realtor looked uncomfortable now, shifting from foot to foot. Jade sat down on the arm of the couch, slowly. "He wouldn't do that," Clarissa said. "He did," I replied. She stepped forward, grabbing for the folder in my hands. I didn't let go. Our eyes locked. "He left you something, both of you," I continued. $100,000 each. "But there's a condition. If either of you tries to contest the will, pressures me to sign away my rights, or attempts any legal maneuver to get more, your inheritance is forfeited." "You're lying," she hissed. "I have the papers," I said, lifting the folder. "And Adele Barnes, his attorney. She'll be happy to walk you through them line by line. I've already spoken with her." "I have no Dad." Clarissa took a step back, suddenly unsure. The mask cracked for just a moment, revealing a flicker of fear. She turned to Jade. "Say something!" Jade didn't speak. She just stared at the floor. The realtor cleared her throat. I think I'll give you all some privacy," she said, already backing toward the door. "Probably best," I murmured. When the front door closed behind her, silence filled the room again. Clarissa was still standing. "So that's it?" she said. "He left everything to you, and we get a threat?" "You get a choice," I replied. "Respect his wishes, or walk away with nothing." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face flushed with a fury she couldn't quite name. "You manipulated him," she said finally. "You knew he was weak, and you took advantage." "I loved him," I said. "I held his hand while he went to doctor's appointments. I made him soup when the treatments made him sick. I listened when he was scared about growing older. Where were you, Clarissa? Where were you when he cried at night, thinking he'd lost you both forever?" That stopped her cold. "I didn't take anything from him," I continued. "He gave it because he trusted me, because I was here when no one else was." Jade stood up slowly. "I need to go," she said quietly, looking not at me but at her sister. "Jade, I need to go," she repeated. "I'll call you later." She walked out without another word. Clarissa turned back to me. "You'll regret this." "Dognesses." "No," I said, and I felt something settle deep in my chest, firm, unwavering. "What I regret is ever believing you saw me as anything more than a shadow in your father's life." She stared at me, something wild and wounded in her expression, and then she left. No slamming doors this time, just the soft click of heels and the sound of a woman who had just realized she lost not just an inheritance, but the last thread of someone who once loved her deeply. I stood in the living room alone again, but it didn't feel empty now. It felt like something had been claimed, not just the house, but the truth. I walked into the kitchen and pulled down Edward's favorite mug, the chipped one with the faded gold rim. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in the chair he always pulled out for me, and for the first time since his funeral, I allowed myself to feel safe. Not victorious, just safe. That night, I dreamed of Edward. We were standing in the backyard beneath the willow tree. He was wearing his flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, a straw hat pushed back on his head. He was humming, digging in the garden like he used to, pulling weeds with one hand and holding a tomato in the other. I stood beside him, barefoot in the grass, the sun warm on our backs. He looked over at me and said, "Don't let them scare you, Rosa. This is still your home." I woke up before I could answer him. It was 5:30 a.m. The sky outside was still dark, the silence thick like a wool blanket. I rose slowly, joints stiff, heart heavier than it had been the day before. But beneath the weight, something had settled, something solid. Resolve. I went downstairs and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The house felt quieter than usual, but not empty. There was a presence in the silence now, Edward's words from the letter, his wishes, his choice. This place was his legacy. And now, it was mine to protect. After breakfast, I stood by the front door with the folder in my hand, the same one Clarissa had tried to tear from me the day before. I stared at it for a long moment, then marched it straight to the filing cabinet in Edward's old study. I placed it carefully between the deed to the house and the binder of legal documents Adele had given me. I was done explaining. Let them talk to Adele if they had questions. I moved through the house room by room, straightening small things. Not cleaning exactly, more like reclaiming. I plumped the pillows on the sofa, smoothed the bedspread, wiped a fingerprint off the glass of a family photo. Our wedding picture remained in the center. I didn't move it. Around noon, Leah called. "I was waiting for your update," she said, not even bothering to say hello. "What happened yesterday?" "They came with a realtor," I said, stirring sugar into my tea. Clarissa tried to act like the queen of the castle. Jade said maybe 10 words. I told them about the will. Leah was quiet for a beat. "How'd they take it?" Like spoiled children who just found out their favorite toy isn't theirs anymore. I heard her exhale, a mix of amusement and frustration. "I hate that you had to go through that alone." "I wasn't alone," I said. "Edward was with me." She didn't answer at first. Then I heard her sniff. "I love you, Mama." "I know," I whispered. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the dining room. It had been months since we'd hosted anyone here. The long oak table was still polished, the lace runner in the center just slightly crooked. I straightened it. Suddenly, I felt a pang of grief, not for Edward, but for the future we never got to live. We had plans for this spring, trips to the coast, new herbs for the garden, the little paint job we kept putting off in the upstairs guest room. We were supposed to grow old here, sit on the porch, watch the birds. Now, it was just me. But grief had taken on a new shape. It wasn't just loss, it was fire. It had burned through the illusions, burned through the false smiles and the pretending, and what remained now was something truer. My place, my voice. The doorbell rang around 2 p.m. I opened it to find Jade standing alone on the porch. No portfolio, no coat, no Clarissa. She looked different, smaller somehow, like something had been peeled away. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the living room. The realtor had never returned. Nothing had been moved. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. She turned to face me, hands clasped in front of her. "Not just for what happened yesterday, for everything. For the years we made you feel like a stranger." "You didn't make me feel," I said. "You treated me like one." She nodded. "I know. I waited. I thought you were taking something from us," she continued. "From him. But yesterday, when you spoke, it was the first time I really saw you. Not just Dad's wife, you. And I realized he didn't just love you. He trusted you. I never earned that trust from him the way you did." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I stood still, letting her words land where they may. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I just wanted to say it." She turned to go, then paused. "You made him happy. I was too proud to see it, but I see it now." Then she left, and for the first time since the funeral, the door didn't slam. It clicked shut gently, like someone had remembered this was still a home. I stood in the quiet, and I smiled. The next morning brought an unexpected kind of peace. The air in the house felt lighter, as if something toxic had been exhaled. For the first time in days, I made breakfast, real breakfast, not just toast and coffee. I scrambled eggs the way Edward liked them, with a splash of cream and a pinch of paprika. I fried 2 strips of turkey bacon, buttered a slice of sourdough, and set the table for one. The second plate stayed in the cabinet. Some habits are harder to break than others. After eating, I pulled out my gardening gloves and walked into the backyard. The sky was a soft, forgiving blue. Winter had begun to loosen its grip, and the earth felt pliable underfoot. Edward's raised beds were still in good shape, just overgrown. I knelt by the rosemary bush we planted together our second year here and began clearing away the dead stems. I hadn't touched the garden since he died, but as I dug my fingers into the soil, I felt something ancient and grounding, like life could still come from broken places. At noon, Adele called. "I figured you might want to know," she said, her voice brisk. "I received an email this morning from Clarissa's attorney. Apparently, they've decided not to contest the will." I paused, standing in the kitchen barefoot, hands still slightly damp from rinsing garden dirt off my wrists. "They're backing off?" "For now, yes, though I suspect Clarissa is still scheming behind the scenes, but her lawyer made it very clear. If they proceed, they lose everything. I doubt she's willing to bet that much money on pride alone." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, Adele, for everything. And well, you don't owe me thanks," she said. "You owe yourself credit for standing your ground." After we hung up, I sat down in Edward's chair with a cup of chamomile tea. I looked around the living room, not as someone waiting for a decision, but as someone who had already made one. This was my home, and no one was taking it from me. Later that afternoon, I opened the hall closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in months. It was Edward's keepsake box. He'd tucked away postcards from our trips, theater stubs, and an old journal he used to write in sporadically. I opened it, flipping through pages filled with his handwriting. One entry stopped me. March 8. Rosa smiled at me this morning over coffee. I think she knows how much I needed her in that moment. I didn't say anything, just took a sip and watched her stir cream into her cup. God, I hope she stays. I closed the journal gently, pressing it to my chest. That night, I called Leah and told her everything. She was quiet for most of it, listening without interruption. When I finished, she said, "I've been thinking, maybe I come visit next week? Just for a few days. We could repaint the guest room like you and Edward always talked about." I smiled into the phone. "I'd love that." She paused. "You okay, Mama? Truly?" "I'm getting there," I said, one morning at a time. Before bed, I walked through the house one more time. Not to patrol or protect, just to be. I stood by the window in the living room, looking out at the dark yard, the moonlight hitting the curve of the willow tree, and I whispered, "I'm still here." The house didn't answer, but in the stillness, I felt Edward beside me. Not in a ghostly way, but in the way that love, once real and rooted, never truly leaves. The next morning brought an unexpected kind of peace. The air in the house felt lighter, as if something toxic had been exhaled. For the first time in days, I made breakfast, real breakfast, not just toast and coffee. I scrambled eggs the way Edward liked them, with a splash of cream and a pinch of paprika. I fried 2 strips of turkey bacon, buttered a slice of sourdough, and set the table for one. The second plate stayed in the cabinet. Some habits are harder to break than others. After eating, I pulled out my gardening gloves and walked into the backyard. The sky was a soft, forgiving blue. Winter had begun to loosen its grip, and the earth felt pliable underfoot. Edward's raised beds were still in good shape, just overgrown. I knelt by the rosemary bush we planted together our second year here and began clearing away the dead stems. I hadn't touched the garden since he died. But as I dug my fingers into the soil, I felt something ancient and grounding, like life could still come from broken places. At noon, Adele called. "I figured you might want to know," she said, her voice brisk. "I received an email this morning from Clarissa's attorney. Apparently they've decided not to contest the will." I paused, standing in the kitchen barefoot, hands still slightly damp from rinsing garden dirt off my wrists. "They're backing off?" "For now, yes. Though I suspect Clarissa is still scheming behind the scenes. But her lawyer made it very clear. If they proceed, they lose everything. I doubt she's willing to bet that much money on pride alone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you, Adele, for everything. You don't owe me thanks, she said. You owe yourself credit for standing your ground. After we hung up, I sat down in Edward's chair with a cup of chamomile tea. I looked around the living room not as someone waiting for a decision, but as someone who had already made one. This was my home, and no one was taking it from me. Later that afternoon, I opened the hall closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in months. It was Edward's keepsake box. He'd tucked away postcards from our trips, theater stubs, and an old journal he used to write in sporadically. I opened it, flipping through pages filled with his handwriting. One entry stopped me. March 8. Rosa smiled at me this morning over coffee. I think she knows how much I needed her in that moment. I didn't say anything. Just took a sip and watched her stir cream into her cup. God, I hope she stays. I closed the journal gently, pressing it to my chest. That night, I called Leah and told her everything. She was quiet for most of it, listening without interruption. When I finished, she said, I've been thinking. Maybe I come visit next week? Just for a few days. We could repaint the guest room, like you and Edward always talked about. I smiled into the phone. I'd love that. She paused. You okay, Mama? Truly? I'm getting there, I said. One morning at a time. Before bed, I walked through the house one more time. Not to patrol or protect, just to be. I stood by the window in the living room, looking out at the dark yard, the moonlight hitting the curve of the willow tree. And I whispered, I'm still here. The house didn't answer. But in the stillness, I felt Edward beside me. Not in a ghostly way, but in the way that love, once real and rooted, never truly leaves. The week that followed passed like the slow unfurling of a bruise, less painful each day, but still tender to the touch. Every morning, I found myself falling into the rhythm Edward and I once shared. Coffee at 6, a light breakfast, the local news on in the background while I swept the porch. The rituals weren't about nostalgia anymore, they were anchors. Each small act reminded me, I still had a life here, a routine, a reason to keep moving. Clarissa didn't return. Not a word, not a text, not a lawyer's letter. I wasn't foolish enough to believe she was gone for good, but for now, the quiet felt like grace. 3 days later, Leah arrived. I heard her rental car pull into the driveway just after noon. I opened the door before she could knock. Mama, she said, dropping her bag and pulling me into a tight hug. She smelled like peppermint and airport coffee, and her coat was still cool from the crisp Calgary air. I held her for a long time. Inside, she dropped onto the couch like she belonged there, and she did. She kicked off her shoes and tucked her legs beneath her, surveying the room with soft eyes. Looks the same, she said. Feels different. It does, I agreed, sitting across from her. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything. About Edward, about Jade, about grief and how it creeps up in odd places like the smell of a shirt you forgot to wash, or the silence of an empty chair. Leah wandered the house later that afternoon, pausing in each room. She stopped in Edward's study, her fingers brushing the spines of his books, the framed photos on the desk. She turned to me. It feels like he's still here. In all the best ways, I said. That evening, we decided to cook dinner together, not out of obligation, but because that's how we healed through warm food and shared space. We made rosemary roast chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, and sautéed green beans. I showed her how Edward used to like his carrots sliced thin, diagonally, fancy style, he called it. Leah laughed, then sliced them just the same. At the table, I lit a candle. Just one. Edward never liked to fuss, but he always appreciated a little softness. We ate slowly, between stories and moments of quiet. I'm proud of you, Leah said, halfway through her second helping. I looked up. For what? For not letting them break you, for staying. I almost didn't, I admitted. There was a moment, after Clarissa pushed me, after she said I was never family. I believed her. Leah's eyes welled with tears. Don't you ever believe that again. I won't, I said. And I meant it. After dinner, we sat in the living room with tea. Leah reached for the keepsake box and asked if she could read a few pages from Edward's journal. I nodded. She opened it, and as she read, her eyes flickered with a tenderness I hadn't seen in her since she was a child. He really loved you, she said. I know. We stayed up late, longer than we should have. We talked about repainting the guest room, about planting sunflowers in the spring like Edward always wanted. Small, hopeful plans. The next morning, Leah opened the curtains in the guest room and declared it too beige for a woman with a backbone like mine. She was right. We spent the afternoon at the hardware store, arguing playfully over paint swatches. She wanted sage green. I leaned toward butter yellow. We settled on a soft, dusty rose, something neither of us expected to like, but both agreed made the room feel warmer. Painting the walls was therapy in motion, strokes of color covering over old shadows. While we painted, Leah asked, "Do you think Jade meant what she said?" I paused, rolling the brush in the tray. I think she meant something, and I think that's more than I ever expected. You'd forgive her? She asked. I already have. Leah looked surprised. Not because she earned it, I said, but because I can't carry that weight forever. Anger is a heavy thing. She nodded slowly. Clarissa's not going to come around, though, is she? Maybe not, but I'm not waiting for her anymore. That night, after Leah went to bed, I sat in the living room alone. The fire had gone out, but the embers still glowed faintly. I opened Edward's letter again, rereading his final words. You were never a placeholder. You were the love of my final chapter. I placed the letter back in the drawer, kissed my fingertips, and touched the photo of us on the mantel. I'm still writing, I whispered. And I was. A week after Leah returned to Seattle, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It came from a downtown law office I didn't recognize, addressed to me in careful print. My heart knocked once, heavy and low. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, just staring at it. I had come to associate envelopes with bad things, evictions, ultimatums, reminders that the life I'd built with Edward had an expiration date in someone else's eyes. But this wasn't that. Inside was a formal withdrawal notice, Clarissa's legal team officially stepping back, confirming her decision not to pursue the estate further. The language was cold and precise, as expected, but something about the finality of it made my hands tremble. It was done. I sank into the chair by the window, the one Edward used to call my thinking spot, and let the air move in and out of me without effort. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd been bracing. Every day since the funeral had felt like I was holding my breath underwater. Now, finally, I could exhale. I took out my phone and texted Adele. Got the letter. Looks like it's over. She replied within seconds. It's over when you say it is. I smiled. The next morning, I walked to the market for the first time in weeks. Just a short trip, a basket of fresh apples, a wedge of sharp cheddar, a loaf of crusty sourdough. Simple things, familiar things. The cashier, a young woman with bright red nails and soft eyes, greeted me with a warm, "Haven't seen you in a while." "My husband passed," I said gently. She placed a hand over her chest. "I'm so sorry." "The Rublin Pan's story as well. And with that—" "Thank you," I replied. "He loved your cinnamon buns." She smiled. "They're still here." I left with 2 in my bag. Outside, the wind was picking up. I pulled my coat tighter and passed the florist's stand on the corner. A bucket of sunflowers caught my eye, bright, reaching toward the winter sky. Edward used to buy them for me whenever he thought I was feeling low. He'd bring them home wrapped in brown paper, claiming they were on sale, even though I knew they weren't. That day, I bought a bundle and carried them home like a promise. When I got back, I found a letter in the mailbox this time, handwritten, no return address. I opened it slowly, the paper trembling in my fingers. Rosa, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect you to respond. I needed to say something. I was cruel. Not just at the end, but for years. I pretended you weren't there. I laughed behind your back. I resented your presence in a place I thought belonged to me. But the truth is, you loved my father, and he loved you. I saw it, even when I refused to admit it. I think I was angry because he was happy without us, without me. Jade told me what she said to you. I don't know if I'm capable of the same. Not yet, but I'm trying. You were never a placeholder. I see that now. Clarissa. I read it twice. Then I placed it beside Edward's letter in the drawer, not to cherish it. Not yet, but to hold space for it. For possibility, for whatever might come. That evening, I lit a fire in the living room and opened the window just a crack, the way Edward used to when he said the air needed to breathe out the day. I cooked stew thick and hearty, the kind that fills the whole house with memory, and ate in quiet reflection. After dinner, I sat with a notepad in my lap. I began to write not a journal entry, not a letter to Edward, but something new. Ideas. Small, brave ones. A scholarship fund, maybe. For older women returning to school. Something in Edward's name. Something that would turn the love we shared into something lasting, something useful. He believed in second chances. We both did. Ours was proof of it. As I jotted down thoughts, my pen paused mid-sentence. I looked around the room at the framed photos, the flickering fire, the stack of letters, and the open window, and I said out loud, "We built something good, didn't we?" And though no one answered, I felt it in my bones. Yes, we did. A month after Clarissa's letter arrived, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. I'd rearranged a few pieces of furniture not out of necessity, but instinct. Edward's armchair now sat at an angle near the window, catching the late morning light. The dining table, once set for guests who never came, now served as a planning station. My notepad lay open beside a calendar, loose papers neatly stacked beneath a paperweight shaped like a small lighthouse, Edward's favorite symbol of guidance. That morning, I stood in the kitchen with a pot of tea brewing and a printout in my hand. Margaret Whitmore Foundation, a scholarship fund supporting mature women returning to school after loss. It wasn't registered yet, not officially. But Adele had helped me draw up the paperwork. Leah had helped with the website, and I'd opened a dedicated bank account the week before. Every cent Edward left in his investment portfolio would go into it. He would have loved the idea. I could almost hear him now, teasing, "Just don't name a building after me. I don't need to be carved in stone." I hadn't planned to go out that day, but something nudged me. A memory, maybe, or a pull. I changed into my good coat, the navy wool one, Edward said, made me look like a woman with somewhere important to be, and drove into town. The church was quiet when I arrived. The same chapel where Edward and I had exchanged vows stood just as it had years ago, the parking lot half full, the doors unlocked. Inside, the scent of wood polish and worn hymnals brought me back to that soft spring afternoon, the vows, the lilacs in my hand, Edward's trembling voice as he said, "I do." End quote. I lit a candle in the small alcove near the altar and sat in the last pew. I wasn't there to pray exactly, just to sit, to remember. A few minutes later, I heard someone clear their throat softly. I turned and saw Jade. She wore jeans and a gray pea coat, her hair loose, makeup minimal. She looked like someone learning how to carry herself again. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. I nodded, surprised but not entirely. She slid into the pew beside me, leaving just enough space for breath but not distance. "I heard about the foundation," she said. "Clarissa sent me the link. I think it's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "I think he would have liked it." "He helped build it," I replied, "with every choice he made before he died." Jade looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring slowly. "I'm selling the agency," she said quietly. "The marketing firm. It never felt right, honestly. I was always chasing something I didn't even want." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone unraveling an old story. "What do you want now?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Something smaller. Something that gives instead of takes. I don't know yet. But I think I'd like to be useful." We sat in silence again. "I was cruel to you," she said. Not as loudly as Clarissa, but just as real. "And I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "And thank you." "Tenure is the story. I don't expect us to be close," she added, "but I'd like to visit sometimes, if that's okay." I placed a hand over hers. "You're welcome anytime." She nodded, eyes shining. We sat there for a while longer, two women quietly undoing years of silence in a room built for renewal. When we parted outside, she hugged me. It was quick, hesitant, but real. Driving home, I thought about the people we love, how often they hurt us out of fear, out of pride, out of the belief that they've been forgotten, and how healing doesn't always come in grand apologies, but in small choices to show up differently. At home, I placed the candle I'd brought from the church on the windowsill. Then I opened my laptop and finalized the scholarship application form. It was time. Time to turn pain into purpose. Time to take the love Edward gave me and give it forward. Spring arrived quietly. One morning I woke to birdsong and the scent of thawing earth, and I knew winter had finally loosened its grip. The air carried warmth again, thin, fragile, but full of promise. In the garden, the daffodils Edward planted years ago were beginning to bloom, little bursts of gold breaking through the dark soil like a whispered reminder, life returns. So did the people. The news about the Margaret Whitmore Foundation spread faster than I expected. It started small, a mention in the local paper, then a brief feature on the community news segment. Adele handled the legal side, Leah polished the language, and Jade, true to her word, volunteered to help design the website. I watched it all happen from the kitchen table, still wearing my house slippers and robe, coffee cooling beside me. It didn't feel like triumph, it felt like healing. The first scholarship application came in on a Wednesday morning. The woman's name was Brenda, 56, widow, 2 adult children, hadn't gone back to school since her early 20s. Her essay was raw, full of self-doubt and resilience. She wanted to study elder care after spending 5 years tending to her husband through ALS. She wrote, "I lost him, but I found my strength." I cried reading it. Edward would have too. That weekend, I hosted a small luncheon in the backyard. It was Leah's idea. A soft launch, she called it. Let the neighbors know what you're doing. Share the story. Make it real. We set up folding tables under the willow tree, hung string lights across the fence. The scent of lemon bars and chicken salad filled the air. I wore a pale yellow blouse and my mother's old pendant, the one she gave me when I left home at 17 with nothing but a suitcase and a heart too big for my own good. Guests trickled in slowly, neighbors, old friends, even the pastor from our wedding, who brought a homemade apple pie. People hugged me, asked about Edward, shared memories of him I hadn't heard before. One woman, Mrs. Carter from 3 houses down, said, "He used to leave flowers on my porch every May Day, never said a word about it." Clarissa didn't come, but Jade did. She arrived just before lunch was served, holding a basket of cornbread muffins and a bottle of sparkling cider. "Peace offering," she said, handing them to me. I smiled, accepted. She mingled with ease, catching up with folks, sharing stories of her father. I watched her from across the lawn, surprised at how natural she looked here. Less polished, more present. Later, as the sun dipped low and people began saying their goodbyes, she approached me. "Clarissa knows about today," she said. I figured. "She's not ready." I nodded. Neither was I, once. "She's angry," Jade continued, "but mostly at herself. I think deep down she knows what she lost. She just doesn't know how to say it." "I don't need her to say anything," I replied. "I just need her to stop hurting herself by hurting others." Jade looked at me, eyes soft. "You've changed." "No," I said gently. "I've just finally stopped apologizing for being here." She exhaled, then wrapped her arms around me in a full embrace this time. That night, after everyone had gone, I stood in the backyard alone. The lights still twinkled. The grass still held footprints. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Edward." The wind stirred the leaves gently in reply. Inside, I took off my shoes, padded into the kitchen, and poured a cup of mint tea. I sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the fence line. In the silence, I felt whole not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had found its place. It no longer owned me. A few days after the luncheon, I received a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was from the community college downtown Westfield. The dean's assistant had heard about the Margaret Whitmore Foundation and wanted to invite me to speak at their spring orientation for returning adult students. "We thought your story might resonate," she said, "especially with women starting over." I hesitated. Me? Speak? I'd always been the quiet one in the room, the one who refilled the coffee, who listened more than she talked. But something about her voice, hopeful, certain, made it hard to say no. So I agreed. The day of the event, I dressed with care. A soft teal blouse, pressed slacks, and the silver necklace Edward gave me on our 3rd anniversary. I sat in the parking lot for 10 full minutes, palms sweating on the steering wheel, repeating to myself, "You belong here. You have something to say." Inside, the auditorium was modest rows of folding chairs, A podium, a projector screen with my name in bold letters beneath the foundation's logo. As the room filled with women of all ages, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the small stage. The microphone hummed softly as I adjusted it. "I'm not a public speaker," I began. "I've spent most of my life in kitchens, gardens, and quiet rooms. I never thought I'd be standing here telling my story. But life has a funny way of rewriting our roles." I told them about Edward, about the love we found later in life, about losing him, about what it felt like to be told, in no uncertain terms, that I didn't belong in the very home I helped build. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I spoke about grief not just for a person, but for a version of yourself that died with them. I talked about rebuilding, not as a project, but as a practice. And I spoke about the scholarship. "Edward believed in starting again," I said. "So do I. Whether you're 50 or 70, whether you've lost a job, a partner, or just your sense of direction, you're not finished, not even close." When I stepped down, the room was silent for a moment. Then a wave of applause, gentle, sustained, real. Afterward, women came up one by one. Some hugged me, some cried. One handed me a photo of her daughter who'd passed from cancer, saying, "You reminded me of her." In quote, back home, I placed the event pamphlet in the keepsake box beside Edward's journal. I whispered, "We're doing all right, aren't we?" The next morning brought another letter in the mail. This one, I recognized. Clarissa. It wasn't handwritten this time. Typed, formal, but personal. "Rosa, I heard you spoke at the college. Jade told me it was beautiful. I couldn't bring myself to go. Not because I didn't want to, because I was ashamed. You've done something incredible. Not just the foundation, but the way you've held yourself. With dignity, with grace. It's more than I've managed in my whole life. I'm not asking to be part of this chapter. But if you ever want coffee, I'd like to listen. Clarissa." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a bridge. But maybe it was a door. I didn't reply that day. I wasn't ready. But I didn't throw it away either. That afternoon, I walked to the community board near the market and pinned up the new flyer for the foundation's first round of awards. Applications were open until May. We'd already received 8. As I stepped back and looked at the small poster surrounded by ads for piano lessons and dog walkers, I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, exactly. Purpose. A reason to keep going. A place to pour all the love I still had to give. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was pruning the roses. Spring had taken hold fully now, and the garden bloomed like it remembered who it used to be. Edward's favorite red climbers were beginning to stretch toward the trellis, their buds tight but promising. I wiped my hands on my apron before answering the phone. "Mrs. Whitmore?" a woman's voice said. "This is Sharon Myers. I'm a social worker with Westfield County." I don't now grade. My breath caught not fear, but the kind of pause that comes when life turns an unexpected page. "I'm calling about a young woman. Her name is Tasha. She's applied for the Margaret Whitmore Foundation scholarship. She listed you as her personal contact." I furrowed my brow. "Tasha, I don't think I know her. She said she met you at the market." "About 3 weeks ago?" I searched my memory, and then it clicked, the girl with the frayed coat, standing near the bus stop, asking for directions to the women's shelter. I had walked with her 2 blocks out of my way, pointed her toward the soup kitchen, and handed her my scarf because the wind had been cutting that day. "I remember her," I said. "Well, I just wanted you to know. She's been accepted, and your foundation's covering her enrollment fees." "It is recible." I sat down right there on the garden bench, the phone pressed to my cheek, the roses glowing beside me. "She's a bright girl," Sharon continued. "Hard start, but she wrote one of the most honest applications I've read in years, and I think you changed something for her." I swallowed hard. "Thank you for telling me." After the call ended, I sat in silence for a while, watching a bee dance between the blossoms. That small act, a scarf, a short walk, a gentle tone, had turned into something lasting, something with roots. I thought of Edward then, how he used to say, "Love isn't loud, Rosie. It's the quiet thing you do when nobody's watching." Inside, I opened the foundation ledger and wrote Tasha's name at the top of the spring recipients list. My handwriting shook slightly, but I liked that. It reminded me I was still changing, still alive. That evening, as the sky turned a soft lavender. Leah called. "I saw the new website updates," she said. "You've got a section for student stories now?" "Just starting," I replied. It felt right. People want to see who they're supporting. "People want to see you," she said. "You're the reason it's real." We talked for over an hour, drifting from foundation logistics to what she'd made for dinner. I told her about Tasha. She told me she was thinking of starting a side project, something small, like a support group for women who'd lost spouses. "I'm not sure I'm ready to lead it," she said, "but maybe I'm ready to hold the door open." Later, after we hung up, I walked the house with slow footsteps. The place didn't feel as empty anymore. It echoed with new memories, now quiet victories, handwritten letters, hope wrapped in envelopes and mailed across town. In the hallway, I passed the mirror near the front door. I paused. For a long time, I hadn't recognized the woman looking back at me. She seemed too tired, too weathered, like someone waiting to be told where she belonged. Now, I saw someone else. Someone who'd been tried and hadn't broken. Someone who'd loved and lost and loved again in different ways. Someone who no longer needed permission to be present. "You're still here," I whispered to myself, and I smiled. Summer rolled in like a gentle tide, not all at once, but with the slow, warm persistence that made you forget the chill of the months before. The garden exploded into color lilies, daisies, lavender swaying lazily beside the path. I spent most mornings out there now, hands in the dirt, straw hat shading my face from the sun. There was something holy about it, digging, pruning, watering. It felt like tending to my soul. Then, one Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Clarissa. Her hair was pulled back tight, her dress simple but elegant. She held a brown paper bag in one hand and a hesitant smile in the other. "I brought coffee," she said. "I remember you liked hazelnut." I stood still, stunned for a beat, then stepped aside. "Come in." She moved carefully through the doorway, as if unsure of the space, or herself within it. Her eyes darted to the photos on the walls, some new, some old. She stopped at the one of Edward holding a fishing rod, grinning like a boy. "I forgot how happy he looked," she said softly. I took the coffee from her and led her to the living room. We sat opposite each other, her on the edge of the couch, me in Edward's armchair. She didn't touch her cup. "I read about the foundation," she said after a long pause, "and I saw the article about Tasha. She's doing well," I replied. "First in her class so far." Clarissa nodded, her jaw tight. "That's good." More silence. Then, finally, she looked at me. "I want to apologize. Properly. I've been rehearsing it in my head for weeks, but none of it sounds right." "Start with the truth," I said gently. She exhaled. "I was awful to you. Even before Dad got sick, I never gave you a chance. I told myself you were just temporary, a phase, someone playing house. And after he passed?" She flinched. I panicked. Losing him felt like losing everything, and I thought, if I could just control something, keep the house, cut ties, then maybe I wouldn't feel so powerless. I said nothing, let her fill the space herself. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she continued, her voice cracking, "but I need you to hear that I'm sorry, not just for what I did after, for never once thanking you. You took care of him. You were there when I couldn't be, or wouldn't be." I looked at her, really looked. There were lines on her face that hadn't been there before. Grief etched its signature in the quietest ways. "I don't forgive you," I said softly. "Not today, maybe not soon. But I do see that you're trying, and that matters." She nodded, eyes wet. We sat in silence for a while, both sipping slowly. The ice in our cups melted faster than the tension between us, but still something shifted. Before she left, she stood at the front door and turned back to me. "I was wrong about you," she said. "Dad was right to love you." And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after, the door still slightly ajar, letting the summer breeze drift in. Later that evening, I walked to the garden. The sun had dipped low, casting long golden shadows over the grass. I sat by the roses, the same ones Clarissa had helped Edward plant years ago when she was still a teenager. They were blooming again. I whispered into the soft air, "You're still reaching for the light." And so was I. July came with heat waves and the scent of fresh-cut grass. The days were long, the evenings golden. It was the kind of summer Edward used to love, porch-sitting weather, he called it. The kind of days made for sweet tea and long, unhurried conversations. One Sunday, I hosted a second luncheon. This one was different from the first. Less about introducing the foundation, more about celebrating it. The first round of scholarship recipients had been announced, and 3 of the women were attending in person. I printed out their names in delicate script and placed them on folded cards at the table. Tasha, Brenda, and Marisol. Leah flew in again to help. She arrived with a suitcase full of new linens, a mason jar of homemade jam, and a warmth that filled the house as naturally as sunlight. "You're doing something real here," she said as we set the table together. "I'm just trying to honor what he gave me," she smiled. "You're building something he'd be proud of." By noon, the backyard buzzed with voices and laughter. Jade came early to help set up chairs. Clarissa hadn't responded to the invitation. I hadn't expected her to. Tasha arrived with her head high and her hands full, a peach pie she'd baked from scratch. "I followed your recipe," she said, smiling shyly. "The one you gave me in the email." "Anyone." Brenda brought lemonade, Marisol brought flowers, and I brought out the stories. Each woman stood and shared a bit about why they'd applied, what they hoped to do, and what the scholarship meant to them. Brenda spoke of starting over after a divorce and a bankruptcy. "Everyone said I was too old to go back," she said, chin lifted. They were wrong. Marisol spoke of escaping an abusive relationship, her 2 children now thriving in school. "Education is freedom," she said. And this gave me my first step. When it was Tasha's turn, she hesitated, then looked at me. "I was sleeping in a shelter when I met Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "She gave me directions, and a scarf, and told me not to let the world tell me who I am. I didn't think anyone remembered me after that day, but she did." My throat tightened. She made me feel visible, like maybe I mattered. The applause that followed was quiet but powerful, more felt than heard. That night, after everyone had gone, Leah and I sat on the porch with our feet up and glasses of iced tea in hand. The stars were just beginning to emerge, soft pinpricks in the velvet sky. "I don't know how you do it," she said. "All of this, and still manage to make people feel at home." "I used to think love had to look big," I replied. "Marriage, rings, grand gestures. But I've learned it's in the little things. A warm meal, a soft word, a scarf." Leah leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're their lighthouse now." I laughed softly. "Edward would say I was just being nosy." "He'd be right," she grinned. We sat there in the glow of string lights and late summer air, the scent of roses still lingering. The past had not vanished, but it no longer ruled the house. It had become part of the foundation firm, quiet and deep. Inside, I passed by the mirror in the hall again. And this time, I saw a woman who had weathered storms, yes, but also one who had planted gardens afterward. The invitation came in a crisp, cream-colored envelope. I found it in the mailbox one late afternoon, tucked between a grocery flyer and a reminder for my dentist appointment. The handwriting on the front was familiar, elegant, controlled. Clarissa. I stood on the porch with the envelope in my hand, the late summer sun slanting low behind me, and for a moment, I hesitated. But I opened it. It was an invitation to a gallery exhibit. Fragments, A Journey in Canvas, by Clarissa Whitmore. Opening night, Thursday, 6 p.m., the Westfield Art Collective. At the bottom, in smaller script, "I hope you'll come. You were part of this, more than you know." I read the card twice, then pressed it against my chest and closed my eyes. Clarissa had never spoken much about her art. It was always background noise, something she dabbled in when time allowed. But this was a statement, a gesture, and an open door. On Thursday, I dressed carefully. A long, navy dress that floated around my ankles. A light shawl, a touch of lipstick, though I rarely bothered these days. Edward used to say, "You don't need it, Rosie, but if it makes you feel like yourself, wear it." So I did. The gallery was small but tasteful, brick walls, high ceilings, the scent of fresh paint and wine mingling in the air. Leah accompanied me, her arm tucked gently through mine. As we entered, a hush fell. Clarissa stood near the far wall, surrounded by a cluster of visitors. She looked radiant in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, a soft, nervous smile on her face. When she saw me, she stepped away from the group without hesitation. "Rosa," she said, stopping in front of me. "You came." "I did. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. There was a beat of silence between us, the kind that used to be cold. Now, it was warm, curious. "I'd like to show you something," she said. She led me to a series of paintings displayed on a side wall. They were abstract, bold swaths of color, fragmented lines, textured with layers and shadows. "This series is about him," she said. "About Dad, and about what it felt like to lose him." I looked closer. One painting caught my eye, a field of dark blue and ochre, with a single thread of red winding through it like a vein. "I called this one the letter," she said. "I painted it the night after I read the copy of his will." I reached out, not to touch it, but to let my hand hover close, feeling the energy radiating from the canvas. "You were the red thread," she added quietly, holding everything together. Tears welled up before I could stop them. "I didn't know how to honor him at first," she continued. "I was so angry, but painting helped, and eventually so did remembering." She turned to face me fully. "You loved him, and he loved you. That used to make me jealous. Now, it gives me peace." I placed my hand gently on her arm. "Thank you for this, for inviting me." She nodded, her eyes shining. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of soft conversation, wine glasses clinking, and music humming gently from overhead speakers. Leah wandered the gallery, chatting with patrons. Jade arrived late, her daughter in tow, and hugged me without a word. Near the end of the night, Clarissa took the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke about her father, and then unexpectedly spoke about me. "She taught me something I was too proud to learn on my own," she said. "That family is not about blood or inheritance or who came first. It's about who stays, who shows up, who gives, even when they're not asked." End quote. I heaven have court. The applause that followed was light but meaningful. I stood in the corner, heart full, Edward's voice in my memory saying, "That's my girl." That night, as I undressed in the quiet of my bedroom, I placed the invitation in the keepsake box beside his journal. Forgiveness hadn't erased the pain, but it had rewritten the ending. Autumn came quietly, like a whispered apology. The leaves on the old willow turned golden and began to fall one by one, carpeting the lawn in a soft blanket of memory. The air grew crisp in the mornings, and the house once echoing with grief now hummed with a different kind of stillness. Not absence, but peace. That October, I was invited to speak at a women's retreat just outside of town. A group of midlife women, divorcees, widows, caregivers, and survivors had heard about the foundation and wanted me to share my story. Not the official, polished version, the real one. I hesitated. Then I packed my weekend bag, wore Edward's favorite scarf, and went. The retreat was held in a quiet lodge surrounded by pine trees. The air smelled like firewood and warm cinnamon. I arrived late Friday evening, and the women welcomed me like an old friend. They handed me tea, asked about the garden, and told me their stories before I even told mine. When it was my turn to speak, I stood in a circle of women who had all in some way been broken and rebuilt. "I thought I lost everything when Edward died," I began, "but what I really lost was my map. He had been the compass I followed." I told them about Clarissa, about being pushed out, about the humiliation, the betrayal, the loneliness of being treated like a stranger in a life I had built. "But here's the thing about being uninvited," I said, voice firm. "You learn how to build your own table." They cried with me. They laughed with me. They held my hands when I finished. One woman, Martha 62, silver curls and a voice like smoke, pulled me aside afterward. "You've lived through the kind of grief most people don't talk about," she said. "Grief that's still alive in the room with you. I felt that too." She reached into her bag and handed me a photo of her late wife. Gone 3 years. "Sometimes I still set a plate for her," she said. "I do the same," I replied, and we smiled like sisters. That night, back in my room, I lit the travel candle I always brought with me, lavender and cedar, and wrote a note in my journal. I thought the foundation would be about them, the women I wanted to help. But it's also saving me. I am rebuilding in the process of holding others up, and that, maybe, is the secret to healing. When I returned home on Sunday evening, the house welcomed me like an old friend. I hung my coat, made a cup of tea, and walked out to the garden. The last of the roses were fading. I clipped 3 soft pink, nearly translucent, and placed them in a vase on the mantel beside Edward's photo. "Thank you," I whispered, "for teaching me to stay soft, even in the hard seasons." The next morning, I received a letter from the city council. They wanted to nominate the Margaret Whitmore Foundation for a civic award, Community Impact, they called it. They asked if I would accept it on behalf of the program. I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the kitchen table. Then I opened the calendar. I circled the date. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about showing up, over and over again, in big ways and small, just like Edward did, just like I would. The award ceremony was held at the Westfield Civic Hall on a Thursday evening in early November. I arrived just after sunset. The sky brushed in deep blue and ash gray, a scattering of stars just beginning to appear. Leah accompanied me, wearing a wine-colored dress and her late father's watch on her wrist. She squeezed my hand as we walked up the steps. "Dad would be so proud," she whispered. I smiled, the kind of smile that held back tears. Inside, the hall glowed with soft lights and polished wood floors. Rows of folding chairs faced a modest stage, flanked by tall potted plants and a banner that read, "Honoring our community builders." I found my seat in the second row, heart thudding beneath my blouse. I wasn't used to this spotlights, microphones, applause. I was more comfortable in the kitchen, with soup simmering and quiet conversation in the air. But tonight, I would stand. When my name was called, there was a gentle wave of clapping. I rose, walked slowly to the stage, and accepted the plaque, a simple wooden rectangle engraved with gold script. Margaret Whitmore Foundation, for uplifting lives through quiet power. I stepped up to the microphone. "Most people don't plan to start over in their 60s, I began, my voice soft but steady. But grief doesn't follow a schedule, and neither does purpose. I shared the story not in its rawest form, but with enough weight to let them feel it. I was told I didn't belong, in my own home, in the life I built. But instead of leaving quietly, I stayed. I planted seeds. I built something new from what was nearly taken. I looked out into the room and saw Jade near the back, standing beside Clarissa. Clarissa's eyes were wet. "She came," I whispered to Leah afterward, back in our seats. Leah only nodded, a smile tucked into the corner of her mouth. After the ceremony, Clarissa approached. She waited until most had left, until the crowd had thinned, until the space felt more like family than formality. She held a small envelope. "I wrote you something," she said, "but I want to say it first." I waited. "You changed me," she said. "Not with force, not with guilt, just by staying kind when I gave you every reason not to be." I didn't speak. I let her continue. "I want to help," she said. "With the foundation, however you'll have me. It's counted." I took the envelope and placed a hand on hers. "Let's start with coffee next week." She smiled through tears. Okay. That night, back home, I placed the award beside the keepsake box. It wasn't about the recognition. It was a symbol of everything Edward and I had built, and everything I'd rebuilt on my own. Later, I stood at the window, watching leaves blow across the yard like soft confessions. The house was quiet, but not empty, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a woman still becoming. The first snow arrived quietly, in the middle of the night. I woke to a stillness that felt sacred, the kind of hush only winter brings. The garden, the porch, even the mailbox, all blanketed in soft white. I stood at the window, wrapped in Edward's old cardigan, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, and watched the flakes swirl in slow, deliberate spirals. A full year had passed since he left. 12 months of heartbreak, rebuilding, forgiveness, and quiet triumphs. A year of learning how to live without him, and in some ways, with him still beside me in the life I was creating. Later that morning, I walked through the house slowly, touching things with a kind of reverence. The photo of us on our wedding day, his favorite hat still hanging by the back door. The drawer in the hallway where his journal sat beside the letters I'd received, Jade's, Clarissa's, and the many notes from the women the foundation had now helped. I made a pot of stew and baked cornbread from his mother's recipe, the house filled with warmth, the scent curling into corners like a memory made visible. That afternoon, Jade arrived. She brought her daughter Mia, a bright-eyed girl with paint smudges on her sleeves and stories about school tumbling from her mouth. Clarissa came not long after, carrying 2 loaves of pumpkin bread and a tentative smile. "I hope we're not intruding," she said. "You're not," I replied, and I meant it. We ate dinner together around the table Edward built. It was the first time Clarissa had sat there since before the funeral. She looked different, not just older, but lighter, as if some long-held burden had finally been set down. As we passed dishes, shared laughter, and poured cider into mismatched mugs, something settled in me. Not closure, exactly, but peace. After dessert, Clarissa stood. "I have something to say," she said, voice quiet but clear. The room stilled. "I spent a long time trying to undo what my father gave you," she said, looking at me. "I thought I was protecting his memory. But the truth is, I was protecting my pride. I couldn't see what he saw, but I see it now." She took a breath. "You were his home, and now you've become part of mine." Leah reached for my hand under the table, and I squeezed hers back, my throat thick. When the evening ended and coats were pulled on, Clarissa hugged me, no hesitation, no half-step, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." "I didn't do it for you," I whispered back. "I did it because it's what he would have wanted, and because it's who I've become," aided Dan. After they left, I stood alone in the hallway, looking at the plaque from the city council, the framed photos, the new scholarship applications pinned neatly to the corkboard. I stepped outside. The snow had stopped. The stars shimmered above like lanterns. I walked into the yard, stood beneath the willow tree, now bare but still proud, and looked up. "I hope you see this, Edward," I whispered. "The house is still full, and so is my heart." The wind stirred softly, like a breath. I smiled. Then I turned, walked back into the house I had claimed not just legally, but in love, in spirit, in truth, and closed the door gently behind me. The chapter had ended. But the story? It was still being written. The story of Rosa teaches us that strength often reveals itself in the quietest acts, staying, loving, rebuilding, even when the world tries to erase you. It reminds us that dignity isn't something others can give or take. It's something you claim for yourself. And perhaps most powerfully, it shows that even in the face of betrayal and loss, grace can prevail. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, but it does mean freedom. Rosa didn't just survive, she transformed, and in doing so, became a lighthouse for others still finding their way through the dark.